All right, well, here we are. So welcome to a Red Feather Mind, Body, Spirit Light Facebook Live event. I'm Christopher McLaurin. Today we have a very special guest, artist and writer Gabe Marihugh. It was created most recently of the Wild Harmonic. This is awesome. Check it out. An oracle deck for waking dreamers. We want to catch up today to learn more about this innovative and amazing deck and what's ahead. But just a little background on Gabe. Gabe Marihugh is an artist, mystic, musician, and teacher of meditation and subtle energy and sacred ritual. He's a doctor of divinity. I want to talk about with that a little bit more than to a lifelong inquirer into the subtle, poetic, hidden, and empowering arts. He's been studying and practicing meditation and myriad of magical teachings for over 30 years. In the course of his explorations, he has wandered near and far in the esoteric world. And while many different teachings inform his approaches, he holds sacred ritual, non-dual inquiry, and energy meditation closest to his heart. He teaches regular classes on meditation and magic and hosts weekly tea ceremonies to help spreading the dreaming. We're spreading the dreaming today with this. And we were just kind of reminiscing. So welcome. Glad you made it here. Yeah. So we were just kind of reminiscing a little bit about how I was introduced to this initially. And it was at a reader studio, which is put on by the Tarot School in New York. It's and maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe now. I don't know. It's been quite a while. I was introduced by Carrie Paris to your awesome deck, and but I've been wanting to learn more about you and your background. You're 30 years worth, so go. We have about 30 years compacted into about 10 minutes.
Right.
So, how did you get started in all this? What was?
How did I get started in all this?
Yeah.
It depends on what you mean by all of this. There's kind of what all of this is like different things, different parts, different kind of like subcultures and worlds and artistic and sociological inquiries coming together.
Right.
So like one aspect of it is that I've always been prone to subtle energy awareness and strange, sort of shifts of state while out in nature and so forth. As a kid, I have lots of memories of that kind of stuff, which I didn't think of as abnormal at the time, right? Or special or anything. But later, getting introduced to the world of meditation and all of the incredible pretense that comes with those worlds, where everyone's like, "Oh, I was enlightened and it was a glowing light," and there's so much reportage on that kind of stuff. But I was fascinated because I was trying to make sense of experiences. So there was that side of it where I'm just an inquirer into subtle energies and non-dual states and so forth. There's another aspect of it that is, just purely artistic. I love the, I feel like the artful moment of creation is similar to the moment where someone appreciates the art and they don't know why. Like it pulls us into a place that we intuitively understand but can't necessarily describe. And so I just love that about art, is that you might get those as results, either or both, right? It's something to shoot for. And of course, that shooting for it is extremely nonlinear. Like it's not a mechanical, reproducible thing. And so I find that fascinating. Like there's a level of like improv and that point that is both an engagement and a surrender, right? Which there's a number of cards talk about this in the deck or refer to that kind of meeting ground. But one card in particular, visceral listening is all about that kind of push and pull at the same time, where you find something that is neither push nor pull, right? It's like right in the middle. And I feel like art is just a worthy undertaking because it helps us tune into that. And then I have like, I guess, probably on paper, I'd be considered like a social critic. I tend to keep my opinions, out of the world. So in that way, I'm not a very social critic. But in like my tea ceremonies and stuff, like I really like to, deconstruct social perception and the influence of media and the influence, all of these things are like so interesting to me because they're rife with subtle energies. Like the entire undertaking of media is a subliminal undertaking, right? Like the medium is the message and, all of these things that we've been talking about for, at least a century, if not much longer. And yet there still isn't a common understanding, a common acceptance and inquiry into it. So I love bringing that to people And then another aspect of it is, just the act of divination is super weird. I started with runes when I was in my early teens, and that was extremely transformative for me, right? In a way, I mean, it had to do with the books I was referring to, right? Like the symbols themselves didn't say much to me until much later, until I really got into like scrying symbolism, right, directly. But the books that were associated with runes over the years, they I didn't always agree with them or whatever, but they just taught me so many different ways to look at the world, and that became my obsession, is how we look at the world affects our experience. And I don't mean that in like a bypassy way of like, just stay positive and everything will work out. But if I go into an experience of like, oh, this guy's a hard-nosed publisher and he's going to like really grill me in this interview, I'm going to like get a weird, edgy vibe out of the experience. But if I go into this like, oh, this is a cool guy, we'll see what questions he asks. I have no idea what they're, there's like a bazillion different perspectives I could take. So in a way, the runes taught me that, life is a sequence of perspectives and they're just ever shifting. And so that's how I got that. Runes are really how I got started in all this. If you want to talk about like occult lore and so forth.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. There is, there are elements of the runes in here. Some of the imagery is very, it evokes so many different traditions. I'll put it that way, throughout the artwork itself. And I think that, each card really can be kind of its own meditation almost in that sense, because there is so much packed in there.
Oh, thank you.
Well, no, I really do think that they are. And for those of you who don't know, they're circular cards. And each one is very, you can just really meditate upon them individually, and they're just so gorgeous too. So, I was doing some readings yesterday for myself, and I'm not sure. Yeah.
All good news, I hope. Yeah.
What's that? Oh, it's all good. All good. Yeah. Yes. It's all my. It's all
positive. Everything will work out.
It's all my. Stay positive. It's all my perspective anyway.
That's right.
So it really is. So, but that reminds me of something that you're trying to bring more into the fore through your work, which is waking dreaming, or dreaming awareness, I guess, really. And so, could you maybe expound on like what that is? Because it's a beautiful concept, but it's a little abstract, so it might be difficult for some people to understand.
Absolutely, and like the first frame of reference is that it's always going to be abstract to some degree, like that. That it's a topic that if you get it defined, you've lost track of it. And so it becomes a way of life. It becomes and not just one way of life, but sort of a container for many ways of life, right? It becomes this sort of meta perspective on what's going on, and yet it's always retreating. It's always this inquiry. It's always an enigma, and yet we learn to dance with that. And so what I mean by it isn't night dreams, but night dreams are great teachers. And I mean, there's a ton of lore and practices and so much I've gotten out of them and all that stuff, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the very act of drawing cards to me is a dreaming inquiry, right? Like the idea that I could pick up a random object and it will tell me something about my life in that moment that's like synchronous. Like that is an entirely dreaming oriented practice. It's like it's calling forth the waking dreamer. It's calling forth the dreaming attention or dreaming awareness within ourselves to come into the waking state and get a little more fluid with what we accept to be true and not true, and so forth, right? And so things like ritual practices and divination and art and music and lots of art forms do this. What I came to discover is that the entire inquiry of subtle energies like clairvoyant practices, energy healing, energy intention practices, energy centers, all of that stuff is this massive package of waking dreaming, right? It's this inquiry into cultivating a waking dreaming layer in our waking state. A dreaming layer in our waking state, and I feel like that this was something that older cultures, I can't prove anything. I'm not a historian or a past deconstructionist, but from what I can tell, this is something that older cultures, or at least representatives of those cultures, were far more in tune with than we are today. And a big turning point came for me, I had been all about like clairvoyant practices and energy centers and like sensing subtle shifts of energy in the room. Like, I'm not talking about like necessarily like, oh, your aura is blue. Like that might be a modality for someone, but I mean like being able to walk into a room and know within 3 seconds who is running things energetically. Right? Like those kinds of things that are like hyper practical. And then also having a sense of like how to position yourself if you want to disrupt that control. If you feel like that person shouldn't be in charge, right? And you know, of course, I'm not talking like that. That's an absolute thing. It's an art form, and it's always temporary and so forth, right? But it's just another layer that some people intuit and become, you know, leaders and even manipulators with that kind of information. And I feel like, well, that's all clairvoyant information, whether you're seeing blue in people's auras or not. But then there's this whole category of teachings that come, you know, largely from Jung initially, and people these days call it soul work or soul making. So there's this whole camp of soul practitioners, you know, Michael Meade and Robert Bly and so forth, and Francis Weller is a teacher that I've studied with. That's, you know, these days where, you know, he taught us. We did a whole course with him on grief rituals, how to create like community grieving rituals to bring that practice back and so forth. And that's all soul work. It's all going into uncomfortable, non-ordinary states. It might involve talking to a tree, right? It's allowing ourselves to bring our dreaming attention forward. Now, within the soul work community, I don't know that they ever think of it as clairvoyance, right? And so I always find myself as this sort of bridge between these different really ideologies, and I feel like they shouldn't be ideologies because they have so much in common with other things, right? And so the thing that clicked for me is that, you know, the word psyche means soul, right? Being psychic means being soul aware. These are not two different things if we go back to the original people that are using these words to talk about these things. So there's a ton to learn about our inner worlds, and what they are teaching us about our outer worlds through, if you want to call it clairvoyant practices or waking dreaming practices, that are actually not just I'm being psychic and I can remote view, like all of those things to me are gimmicky. I want to know how it can heal your being and your relationship and help you build a community that's sustainable, right? And that to me is what the soul work brings to the clairvoyant camp, right? Like there's this living well, thriving kind of connection that needs to happen there between the two. I'm not sure that answered your question, but I sure enjoyed saying all that. So.
No, it answered all my questions. No, I had no more questions now. No.
That's
so,
great.
We went through all the questions now in one monologue. No, I like what you're saying though, is as far as the soul work versus, you know, what I would maybe call the bells and whistles of things. You know, looking or striving. I mean, in a lot of, you know, traditions, you know, people are striving for visions or whatever, the different kinds of things. But I think, you know, when you get right down to it, the most important thing is the healing of the soul. So it can unite. You mentioned, you know, non-duality. You know, I studied Vedanta for a while, and so you know that, you know, it's an interesting kind of like shift in perspective. You know, dual versus non-dual and all of that.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to understand, okay, well, maybe, you know, we are that, how are things connected? How is it all connected and brought together too? And soul work is a good part of that. You kind of reference in your book thing, in your book about, you know, becoming a living work of art, which I really like, you know, trying to be the best version of yourself, which again is, you know, imbued in other traditions too, but, you know, it takes work, you know, and it takes almost a constant work and an awareness to be able to know what you need to do and be open to those different kinds of things. And I think that, you know, what you're unifying, that's the beauty of this, right? Because you're unifying some, you know, really important, you know, spiritual principles with something that's accessible for people who might not want that, but you know, are open to exploring it, you know, in a way that is going to be that they can make their own. And I think that's, you know, really, you know, important with this. Within here too, it's kind of funny. You talk about a doorway. These are like a doorway that you have to open. You know, that you open. There's a door. It's a door that has shoes above it, right? To open. And So you have to walk through it. And for whatever, now this is probably a bad analogy, but I related it to Steppenwolf, and there's the book Steppenwolf, and the Magical Theater, and for Madman Only. Now it's not quite that dramatic, perhaps, but it is a choice to be able to explore different parts of yourself, even if they're uncomfortable, like they're saying. So you have in here many different elements. So let's talk about the elements maybe that you put in here. So we have earth, water, fire, air, the traditional 4 plus spirit, sometimes there, sometimes not. But then you have other dimensions to that. So could you maybe go into, I won't give it away, I'll let you give it away, what those elements are and how they relate to each other.
For sure, yeah. The elements can be used in lots and lots of different ways. I think I was really taken with the idea of the elements in an initiatorial sequence where one element helps you reach another element and so forth, right? And which is also an alchemical sequence, right? So it helps you transform, right, from one to one. And that comes through like the Golden Dawn material and all the people that riffed off of that stuff. That Crowley, of course, making it famous, but lots of people have given their 2 cents on the topic of it. But you have the idea that the pentagram is the 4 elements that open the 5th element of spirit, right? So you balance your 4 elements and you open the 5th element. Now, what I found was really interesting is that's the pentagram image of initiation, which of course the pentagram is an amazing, that isn't why the pentagram is special. The pentagram is special because of the golden spiral hidden within all of its measurements. Like, it is an amazing shape on a sacred geometrical level that most people who fling pentagrams around and wear it don't even know why that, amazed early mathematicians who were esotericists, right? And so in a magic circle, you have those same 4 elements, and the idea is that you balance those 4 elements in a magic circle. You might do all kinds of other things, but that's one of the main reasons to do a magic circle, is to balance those 4 elements around you, and that reflects within you, which opens the 5th element, which is the sort of column or pyramid shape that forms in the circle, if you want to visualize it that way. So I love this idea of balancing the first 4 elements, and that opens the 5th element. And at some point in my journey, I made this connection to, there are traditions that place that same sequence of elements within the psychic centers of the human body. And so you have the root center is earth, and moving up water, fire, air, and then spirit would be in my crazy world would be then placed at the throat, which makes perfect sense. Spirit is resounding.
I noticed that too. That's so interesting, the way that you through the different.
Yeah, so that's why I use the elements in the order that I use them, and the underpinnings of the perspective of the approach. Now, what I'm trying to teach isn't necessarily that. That's just to give it some functional alchemical underpinnings, right? So I'm not just saying fire is your will, deal with it, but rather no, it is in this system it's at your stomach, and you can go into all kinds of things about the stomach. I mean, the stomach is the solar plexus in the stomach, the energies there, whatever you put into your stomach acts on it. Right? There's nothing more willful than the stomach. The stomach is what's going on? Here's the formula, get it, right? Kind of a thing. And so but then that brings all these teachings about will, the stomach, right? You have to be discerning. You don't want to digest something with acids that won't work. You have to be discerning. You have to also be discerning of not putting things in your stomach that you can't deal with, or healing in the stomach, healing the will so that it can function stronger again. So there's all these layers of how the elements relate to the energy centers and how that relates to the body. And by mapping all of that into the cards as underpinnings, not as overt teachings, but as underpinnings, my suspicion, I would say my hope, but my suspicion is that then brings in a subliminal layer of that kind of bringing, it's easy to get all dreamy and clairvoyant, but we want to bring that back into the body and express it through our life, right? It's pointless. It's pointless to be alive if we're just trying to die. If we're just trying to ascend somewhere and trying to get out of the human experience. I find that adventure I guess it's legitimate, but I find it completely uninteresting and uninspiring. I think it's far more interesting to try to embody higher understanding through our totally dysfunctional physical realm, right?
Well, yeah, that's great. I mean, it's fascinating. Yeah, you and I are definitely in alignment for that. As I talked about the dancer earlier, I couldn't get into this just trying to always striving for the attainment of the unity.
Yeah.
Where it was more interested in the integration. Talk about integration, than
Yeah.
two, of the different elements too. And I love how and you definitely go into that as far as how you're integrating again the four that most
Right.
people go talk about or know, opening the fifth. And then you go into but then even with the fifth, and it breaks into other areas. So you have the spirit that also goes into the celestial and the dimensional. Then too. So what was the choice for that to kind of pull those out, which were born of the spirit, as I understand it, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all, once you get to the realm of, so there's so many ways to describe this, right? Because it's all storytelling, right? And so there's different sort of like, you guess you could call it like story versions or teachings to try to bring the spirit of this to someone. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to teach, the spirit of this kind of a practice and inquiry, not the mechanical structure of it so much. But everything comes from the root, right? So if you think of it like a tree, so you have your roots, and then you have your second energy center is the trunk, mm-hmm. right? Which has to bend in the wind, right? It's the watery center. And then you have your branches, which are the sort of fiery, go in every direction, collect collect as much real estate as you can with the branches. Mm-hmm. The will, right? The will going out to all these centers. Then you have the air at the heart center, which is like the leaves. They're just really out there collecting the air and the sunlight and everything. And that opens up the spirit, which is the vibration, the ability to transmit, right? The wizard voice, if you will, right? The voice resounding, or the horn resounding, like from the Monty Python, Eric the Red, or Eric the Viking. So what happened for me, where I came up with the celestial and dimensional, is that I had just sat with these formulas for so many years, that basic like fivefold formula, and how it transforms mm-hmm. into they always say like the pentagram, once your pentagram is solid, then you can enter the hexagram, which is the more celestial, planetary, starlit energies, right?
Right.
And I like, there's something about the geometries and the symbolism that I can intuitively be like, yes, I get that. But I was like really sitting with it, like trying to understand that alchemical process. So my approach is to understand the higher energy centers, mm-hmm. not as above the heart center, but rather as within the heart center. In our third dimensional perspective, it sort of gets splayed out, and we see the throat and the third eye and the crown in this sort of three-dimensional above the heart kind of approach. But really energetically on a sacred geometrical plane, they spiral into the heart. They're deeper layers of the heart. So when the throat is aligned, your voice comes from the heart. When your mind is aligned, when your third eye is aligned, it's rooted in the heart, which is rooted in the roots center of the third dimension, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this idea, and so on into the dimensional. Of course, the dimensional is like where the your head gets blown out. If the celestial isn't cosmic enough for you, you can enter into the dimensional space beyond that, right? Mm-hmm. Which is truly, incomprehensible on some level. So it's like this idea that, because the heart is the first thing that grows in the human body. Right? Mm-hmm. We begin as the heart. And so I began to see, like in my meditations and so forth, I began to see that what the heart does is it expresses downward into the physical realm, creating the root, the second energy center and the third energy center, to like give it a place to exist, give it a body. And then it says, oh, that was interesting. What if I do that in an upward direction? And mm-hmm. it generates these other ones, but they're all within the heart. They're all mm-hmm. expressions of that first cellular structure, energetic auric structure that is the heart of the human, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, again, usually when I teach, like not a lot of that's in the book. It's referred to here and there. That's like its own class that, like I call Dreaming Your Soul Awake, and it's it's a multiple week course that I teach that's all about the energy centers and the different layerings, and that's an attempt to summarize all of it into one brief description. Basically, the celestial and the dimensional just came to me as I was working on the cards. It was like a symmetry that just revealed itself as I got closer to that level of it. I was like, oh, this isn't a 25 card deck. I was like, this is a 36 card deck. I was like, oh no, it's not.
Oh no, it says
going and going, which I loved as a creative. And then at some point I was like, stop. I did actually have there's a version of it that is 81 cards.
Oh.
So there were a number of cards that either got clipped from the deck or found their place in other locations, which was part of the creative sort of conversation I was having with the deck.
Fascinating. Maybe that could be a special edition then, or something.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, a lot of them are in the deck. They found their way into a lot of those. It was a ninth element that I was playing with, or at the time it was the eighth element, and then shadow became the eighth element, and I had this ninth element sort of floating over there, and I was like, "What is going on here?" At some point, you have to move on.
At some point, you had to. Right? Yeah, but it's still going to be. Evolving too. So then you touched on shadow. The shadow is a really interesting component of this deck. Can you call it like a pseudo element as well? So how does that kind of fit in? Where does that kind of?
Well, yeah. So the strange thing, like, so if we just play with storytelling, right? Like just the idea of like that a description can reveal a metaphoric truth, right? That's like storytelling, teaching. The basic, what a shadow basically is the light denied, right? If you have a light shining and there's an object, behind the object is a place where light is being denied to be there, right? So if we take that into a sort of psyche or soul, right, mental, emotional kind of understanding of it, the shadows within us are places where the light or awareness is being denied, like you mentioned Vedanta, which ultimately is like, bringing awareness to absolutely everything, right? And so while I don't teach, I would preach a Vedantic approach, I don't teach it. just because there's I try to honor the weird creativity of my being, and I think other people speak the Vedantic language better than me. But ultimately, that bringing the light of awareness to everything is shadow work, right? Now, there can be some wobbling and flipping and flopping that needs to go on an active level and an inward journeying level, and in order to bring light to shadows, it isn't necessarily just as easy as sitting down and saying, oh, here's my insecurity, or here's my grudge with the universe, now I see it, I am free. It's not necessarily, it can be that, it can be, but nonetheless, that's the basic idea of the shadows, is that already a shadow is something that's being objectified, right? There's no such thing as an object. Like on a functional level, it's very healthy to view things as objects. It helps us not get hit by cars and helps us get, coffee into our mouths and so forth, right? Like the storytelling of objects is reflective of our direct experience, and that's beautiful. But, basing it on, molecular understandings and on, there's no like one thing ever. That nothing is a thing. There's no idea of that. Like the word thing is tied to the word think, right? It's always a projection that something is a thing. It's a thought, like that is a cup. And in truth, it's not. It's just a field that's part of bazillions of other fields. And it's just happening, it's coalescing in that form for a moment. So a shadow is something that we've objectified, and it's really difficult to heal anything that we've objectified, right? Like, that's basically where our healing needs to take place, is in the places that we've objectified things emotionally. Like, we could be like, oh, this person victimized me. And as long as I objectify myself as the victim, then I'm in victim mentality. Doesn't mean I'm not a victim and that shouldn't be addressed, and there shouldn't be recompense and making things right in the world. Absolutely. And ruthlessly undertake to have that be so, please, everyone. Right? Like, I'm in big support of writing the course here for all peoples on this planet. But nonetheless, if we objectify ourselves, if we identify ourselves as the victim, then we lose so much of our power to shift those energies out of our energy field. And so a shadow isn't necessarily about being a victim, but often is about that. That would be I could have called it the victim deck, I guess, or the victim, suit, the victim element. But I like shadow because it plays with that energy of the light denied. And I wanted to bring it in partly because of the soul work aspect of it. Like clairvoyant work is often very bypassy. It's often like, just stay positive and just manifest your dreams and you're creating your reality. Of all of those statements are true on a level for me. Absolutely. I've seen amazing things and I would attribute those statements to being totally true. But there has to be a level of maturity of recognizing, I didn't consciously create this person punching me in the face. I didn't consciously create, systemic limitations within our government and social systems and so forth, right? Like I'm not like actively participating and saying, I wish for those to become this way, right? And so like there's a level of maturity where we can understand that our energy is creating things and our alignments with things are at least supporting things, if not creating things. Creating is another way of talking about supporting things. Yeah. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I wanted to bring those worlds of real, in the trenches, human sociological transformation, which is shadow work, and marry it with the clairvoyance and the interdimensional consciousness, because these usually people get into interdimensional consciousness and they're like, I'm checking out. I'm just going to try to manifest money and live in a hot tub. And people who are like wrapped up in sociological transformation are like, often are reinforcing it by how they're like fighting it, right? Like it isn't informed by the interdimensional and the subtle layers of everything that can happen to allow things to shift. Both of those things are objectifications. Both of those things are shadows that arise within us. Once again, a very non-simple answer, but hopefully it addressed at least one of the parts of the question in there.
Yes, many. Good. So, I wanted to get to talking about within the cards themselves. Since they are circular cards, that's a very important component of how they can be read. And there are different ways to read them. And you go to the rotation, of the cards, how that works, which I think is really amazing, into Ascension and embodiment. Could you maybe go into a little bit how that works? So essentially, like, if I understand, so you do it 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock or what, however you want, in a different area, and there's no bad area either. So when we talk about Ascension, which I think is really brilliant, because you touched upon this in the two questions that you've answered. Which is beautiful. But as far as the looking for that ascension, but the rest of it is equally important, which is the embodiment, right? And so I think within each of these cards, that is addressed in how you do readings. Could you go into how that maybe works a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So like I drew this one. There we go. Spectral maps just before, but I don't remember what direction it was in. So I'll just draw another quick card here and see what direction it's in.
Yep.
All right. This is literally the center of the deck, this card, Chaotic Return. And as you can see, this is the bottom. Is it the bottom? No, that's the bottom. This is the top, right? So it's basically it's pointing to 9 o'clock. So the circular decision was inspired from the sort of sacred geometrical idea, like flower of life circles and things like that. I would play with those a lot. And one day it just occurred to me, like, try some of the art. Like I had a lot of the art developed and they were in like squares and rectangles, and I was playing with different shapes. One day, as I experienced it, the deck was like, put us in circles, right? So I was like, okay, we'll do that. And I instantly loved it. And it made me realize, it's like right out of the gate, it's saying, think outside the box, right? like if you draw a circular card, it's like there's this geometric, sacred geometry is getting its voice. Like, think outside the box, which to me, I was like, I couldn't ask for a better basic communication about what this deck is about, what soul work is about, what all of it is about. It's thinking outside the box. So then we have this notion that we talked about before of the sequence of elements. And in one sequence, they're ascending through the energy centers. And one sequence, if you reverse it, then they're descending. Now, in a lot of spiritual traditions, there's this hyperfixation on ascension. You know, got to get to the crown, whether they call it that or not. They're like, I want to get
Right.
to the sublime, the summit, which does no one else any good and does that person very little good. There tends to be a dissolution of that person at the summit. Right?
That's exactly what I was getting at, Gabe. I mean, that push to just become a being of light. But then what about everybody else? How do you integrate that?
Everyone else.
What about everybody else?
What was the point anyway, right?
You're floating over there. And stuff, yeah.
Yeah, like you in those paradigms, we all start as a being of light anyway. So why try to get back there? Why not play a more interesting game, which would be like bring the being of light to this world, right? Like try to uplift the world, which is probably extremely arrogant to undertake, but I love the idea. So in soul work, there's often taught there's this dichotomy of spirit, which is the upward movement, more sacred geometry, and be positive, and all of it's legitimate, but there's a fixation on it. And soul work is often, someone comes to soul work through tragedy, almost always, right? Through grief and tragedy and just irreconcilable experiences, and they don't know what to do about them, and they find soul work, and soul work is like, go down. Right? It's basically like you need to go into the murkiness, and this is where the alchemy comes in. Because you know the first material, the primal substance that we're always starting with in alchemy is this shadow, right? It's murky. It's hard to see, right. And that's what a grieving, an extreme grieving state is. That's where it's hard to see what it is we're actually dealing with, and soul work introduces this notion of going into that. So. We have these, I borrow some of that for this deck. Within this deck, we have this paradigm of ascension, which is like going up the energy centers to the crown to attain the vision of unity, but it might just be an attainment of whatever form of vision someone's after. Like, what do I do with my life? You know, is also an ascending thing. It's like you're trying to purify, you're trying to discern, you're trying to cut away so that you can see what it is you're trying to get to. What do you really want or desire or hope for, whatever formula of words you're playing with. And then that really doesn't matter if you do that, if you don't then try to embody it, which is the path of descent, which is often extremely villainized within our spiritual teachings, right? They're like, don't go down, don't ever go down. But soul work encourages us to go down, even though it totally sucks. But the great revelation of soul work is that our level of joy is equal to the level of sorrow we have been able to not get rid of within ourselves, but fully feel. Right, by allowing ourselves to really grieve and feel the weight of the world and all about other people, about ourselves, whatever. I mean, we're all just in these tremendous grief fields, no matter our situation in life, and some of us far more than others for sure. But everyone's in this like massive grief field, and it's all ungrieved. Like I see riots, and I'm like, oh, that's a grief ceremony. Because they don't have one in their community, right? They don't have another way of working out the terrible grief that will get them back to the ability to take action to change things. First, they need to wail. We've lost our wailing. We've lost our punching and destroying of the altar because everything has gone wrong. And how dare you, God? And we've lost our ability to really dig into that stuff, and then we need to. So, but that's all been villainized. That's all down. That's like a downward movement, right? It's where we find all that gunk, but ultimately it's where we find our depth. It's where we find our roots. It's where we actually are able to take nourishment in from the underworld, or as I like to call it, under the world, right? Like it's not literally underground. That's a different word. The underworld is what is subliminally under the world, like it's the layers below our cognizance going on, right? Under the world. All right, so I'm still getting to your question. So now we have this card rotation. We have this card rotation, and I instantly was like, oh, cool, card rotation. I got to do something with that, and I sat with it for many months and played with different ideas. And then someone was like, oh, you mean like the Mother Piece Tarot? And I was like, oh, that's right. I'm not the first round deck. And as it turns out, there are many other round decks that are lesser known. And Mother Piece is the first that would come to mind for most people. And I love that deck. It's fantastic. And they had a sort of lunar cycle rotation in it. I was like, oh, no, now I'm just kind of going to rip off their idea if I do a rotation. But then it occurred to me, I have my own thing with rotation. And that is the 12 o'clock going around the clock
Yeah.
6 o'clock is the ascension energy, even though it's a descent, right? So there's some symmetry and mirroring going on with the symbolism on the physical cards itself, right? So because every ascent requires a lot of descent, and every descent requires a lot of ascent. Right? They're not two ultimately. Soul and spirit are not actually two different things. The 1 to 6 o'clock is a reflective of our energy rising through our energy centers, and then the 6 through 12 o'clock is that process of embodiment. So as a quick draw, sort of key, like if I draw a chaotic return, which is ultimately what we were talking about. Chaotic return is the heart chakra, I guess. Oh, there I used the word chakra. I was trying to avoid it. Is the heart energy center. Is the heart energy center of the heart, and this is the center of the deck. This is the center of the heart. This is the heart of the heart, right? And most people would say, well, the heart of the heart, that's going to be like a really pink rose quartz, butterflies and unicorns kind of place, right? And I said, no, the heart of the heart. What is the ultimate space within the heart? The ultimate space within the heart is the ability to love, or if you prefer the word, align with anything. It's the ability to allow. Not necessarily physically allow, but the ability to align and accept anything, the ability to have love for anything, to align with that. That's the most radical form the heart can take, right? And so we have this card, Chaotic Return, because you can't align with anything unless you have a bit of chaos within you. You have to tap into the everything within yourself in order to align with anything. And again, it's probably an arrogant perspective to think that anyone could ever do that. But some people seem to demonstrate it, some saints and so forth. And so that's really what this card represents. So I've drawn it for myself, and it's at the 9 o'clock position, which represents an embodiment cycle. It's it's like right in the middle of it, right? So the sort of key points are like the 12 o'clock, the 3 o'clock, the 6 o'clock, and the 1 o'clock, or the 9 o'clock. The 12 o'clock is the still point between the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. The 6 o'clock is the still point of right in the middle of the entire cycle, and the 3 o'clock and the 9 o'clock are the still points, or not the still points, the momentum points right within either ascending or descending. So I would begin to reflect on that, like, how am I learning to embody, bringing, I guess you could say, a loving kindness or a loving attention to every situation, no matter what the situation, like literally letting the chaos within all, the dragon within me tune and express itself through my heart in every moment, even if it's just like that messed up. Can I still stay in my heart? Like, so I'm trying to clarify. I'm not saying you have to love the thing, but if you can stay in a place of heart, better word than love, because heart has more range of experience than just love. But if you can stay within a place of heart, in no matter what situation, then it requires some chaos. So anyway, that's the basic notion. You can read it as an ascending energy and kind of see where you are in that cycle of like, oh yeah, I'm purifying. And ascending energy is generally about purification. I think since I use the word chakra, I'll use the word samskara, right? We have these energetic blocks within our systems. And as the fires raise within us, as the dragon energy raises within us, it burns things away, right? And it like sucks. And it may not be an internal burning. It could just be like, oh, that relationship went totally bad, or that situation in your life is completely blowing up. That's an ascending energy. Now, an embodiment energy can look similar to it. It can still blow things up because it's trying to take form, right? And so it can destroy forms in order to take it. But generally speaking, the ascending energy is moving us out of situations, and the embodiment energy, even if it's sort of clearing way as well, is bringing us into situations. And the cards say that. should you care to look into that layer of them?
No, definitely. It's a very unique perspective and a way to just kind of live with the cards, and that's why I was saying, each card is kind of a meditation unto itself. To back up a little bit, it's interesting that that's the card that you picked, the heart of the heart, really, because I think that is the heart of things. Is that random or is it on purpose? But it really speaks to the whole a profound message within the deck and your overall message too, and it aligns with it. So many paths or ways that people come to this intuitively. For myself, I've gone more of a I would say Christian esoteric path, perhaps, and so that you stop at the heart anyway. Basically, the heart is where it kind of like flows into, and everything so it gels, with that as well, because that's where you live. That's where you that's where the power is. That's where, and that's how you then affect real change, and that's how you affect others and do the most good. Not being up here necessarily, but utilizing these things, letting it flow through that center, essentially. So that's in that spiral. So it really does kind of gel with some intuitive aspects that are just there.
That's great. Thank you.
So I think that where and he helps people get there, essentially. So it's a way for people to get there, essentially. Really. So now within this too, not only can you pull one card, you can actually do spreads, right?
Absolutely, yeah. and that's where it starts to get interesting.
Talk for 45 minutes about one card.
Yeah.
So how do you use spreads with this?
Well, of course, anyone that's done any divination and has their own shtick and approach to spreads, you do whatever you want with the cards, right? You can play with them in any way. There's words, there's pictures, there's directions, there's colors, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But I've mapped in some of it consciously, some of it I discovered after I created the deck, like just was woven into the structure of it. A few ways of playing with things, and part of that is the elemental interplay between the cards. So first of all, every card or almost every card is two elements. There's a set of cards right in the middle of each element that's air of air and fire of fire and earth of earth that are just one element, and that in and of itself has its own interesting sort of like primary elemental energy to it, right? If you were to draw one of those, it means you're very much fixated on that energy in your life, or if you're looking at it as energy centers, it points directly to an energy center that you're fixating on. However, and so that's the case with this chaotic return, right? It's air of air. And so it's, if I were to attribute it to an energy center, I'd say I'm really looking at deep heart work. And then I draw another one, dimensional of spirit. So that's the crown energy of the throat energy, right? The dimensional of spirit within my system here. And so what that is saying, so the element that comes before is the communicating element, and the word that comes after the of is the receptive element. So dimensional of spirit is a throat center card, but it's what the dimensional energy is communicating or lending or teaching, however you want to look at it. It's what it's communicating to that second, or the main one that the card is representative. So this dimensional spirit, total freedom, can be thought of as a throat center card, because it's spirit, and it's what does the dimensional teach the throat? Well, the throat being the resounding energy, our vibration that we put into the world, our expression, our personality, our the higher energies of our active will come through our voice, and our everyone also would even think of like what you choose is your voice. Isn't that a Smashing Pumpkins lyric, I think? And they were right. And so that's where we're sitting with this card, but it's the crown that's communicating. What is the crown communicating? Well, the crown's communicating interdimensional consciousness. It's communicating, like, it's always saying like beyond. Oh, it's always like communicating something hidden, slipped between the layers, and that kind of a thing. And so what it's reminding us is that we have total freedom, or it's at least reminding us, not total freedom within. It's not an earth, water, or fire card. It's a spirit card. So you can say what you want, right? You can be the personality that you want. You can be the expression that you want. But of course, it's not saying you can literally just do anything. I think on some extreme esoteric level, I do believe that we are capable of absolutely anything, anyone. But on a very practical level, I think it's all about, taking inventory and seeing what's likely, right? And playing the numbers. I like to say, I don't usually push the river. I like to push the river occasionally just to see what will happen. But in general, I like to go with the flow and see what I can manifest, as an expression of me. So this card is more of a meditation of reminding myself to reflect on all of the freedom I have. So if I'm really stuck on like, oh, I need to go this direction in my life, but I don't want to, and all, this card is reminding, just think of some other options. You know, it's like, no, but I have to go and do this thing. I've signed paperwork. I have to. And it's like, no, just remember, you have freedom. It might have consequences, right? But you like let the freedom back into your decision making, not so much so that you choose those other routes, but so that the route you choose is informed by that sense of empowered freedom. So that you're actually choosing it, that you're not compelled to be making these decisions, but that you realize you have a sense of freedom to be coming from. So then that again is talking more about the card. What I want to get at is a card like this, where we have, sorry, getting at the camera right, we have two cards that are dimensional. So one is dimensional of spirit and one is dimensional of fire. Now, if I were to draw these two cards together and I look at the elements, I can see that they're both crown energies being taught to me. One is a crown energy that is teaching my throat, and one is a crown energy that is teaching my solar plexus, my will energy. Now, for me, there's a symmetry between the lower will of fire and the higher will of spirit, right? They're both will centers in a way. One's a lower will, earthly will, and one's a higher, more spiritual will. And then, so I could see that like what's going on here is ultimately a game of will. Just by looking at the cards, I'm looking at lower will and higher will, but I'm looking at the highest informed frequencies coming from the dimensional to both of those wills. So this indicates to me like really a kind of sovereignty, not a temporal sovereignty, but a esoteric sovereignty that I have. These two cards together are basically telling me I have tremendous support in the unseen realms, whether you want to call them past lives or spirit guides or allies or whatever, you know, whatever I want to get into personally, it's telling me I have tremendous support in the hidden realms. And that gives me to remember that in order to let in all of my sense of freedom, because I can call upon this kind of ally, or I can call upon this kind of ally. Do I want to, you know, smash down the obstacles, or do I want to walk around the obstacles? Do I want to build a stairway so that others can climb over it when they reach this obstacle, right? Like I have all those options within those two cards, and that information comes from playing the elements off of each other. And now it also, you know, it tells me that even though both of those cards are different energy centers, if one's the fire, one's the spirit, one's the solar plexus, one's the throat, they both have dimensional in common, which puts a bit more of an emphasis on the crown in this situation to ponder, to meditate on, to do energy work with, because it's playing out in both of those cards. So that, you know, it's a way to like if nothing else, you can look at the energy centers within a spread and just sit with those energy centers. You could, you know, run, you know, if you have an energy practice, you know, perhaps Reiki or other clairvoyant, you know, angel healing work, or who knows, you know, so many different things, which I think are all potentially totally legit. You know, it's an indication of like what energy centers to work with. You can imagine like, you know, doing something with your crown and then bringing it down to each of those centers and just kind of sit in that space that the cards are indicating is happening. It can be like a, not in a medical way, but like a prescriptive energy work kind of way, right? It can give you prompts for visualizations to work with as well.
Right. And that's just two cards. Boy, I tell you what.
That's just two cards, right? Yeah, there's a spread that I think it's in the book, and I've gone into it in some other interviews and stuff like that. And when I teach online, I usually play with that because it's an energy center spread. And I used to teach it with all 7 energy centers. And then I was like, okay, I'm only doing 5 this time. And I'm like, okay, we're just going to look at the first three, because the first 3 are literally the roots of everything else going on.
Right.
There's just so much information that can come from those things.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's just so much packed in there. So, well, this has been great. We're almost at time already, believe it or not. You've been so enlightening about the deck itself. So, how can people interact with you? Are you on social media? And
Yeah. I'm not, I'm not hyperactive. I'm not a post every day. Here's a picture of my lunch. Here's what I think about politics. I'm a social media practitioner. It's just, it grosses me out at this point. But I love sharing, of inspirations and what I'm doing with the deck. And of course, I love positive attention. Bathe me in it, please. Yeah. encourage me. But yeah, I am on Instagram, and I have a Facebook page. It's very secondary. I'm primarily on Instagram, just because I find like that's the least, to be honest with you, the least toxic of social media channels at this point. And there's a website and an email newsletter you can sign up for at the website. The website is just the name of the deck, wildharmonic.com. So just wildharmonic.com. And yeah, I love questions and interactions online and so forth. So please feel free to prompt me into more activity. At some point, there's a number. I'm in the middle of a series of blog posts, one on each card. And so signing up for the newsletter will keep you tuned into that. As we've hit the holidays, that has slowed down a bit, but that we'll be picking up. It'll be hopefully continuing sooner than later, but at least by the new year, then that will be picking up again. We'll be doing deeper dives into each card. So creating an online reference in that way for further study of each card and like where I'm coming from with each card.
Yeah. So that's great. I would encourage anyone watching to check that out too, because as you can see, there's so much you can get into with just one card. Really, it's really amazing. And so the Wild Harmonic is available now. It's available. So thanks, Gabe, so much for this. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I feel like I owe you something now. It sounds like a session there. So I really do appreciate that. The Wild Harmonic Oracle is available on RedFeatherMBS.com and where other Mind, Body, Spirit items are sold. Thanks again for everybody, and hope you all have a beautiful day.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right.
Peace, everyone. Okay.
Bye-bye.